Hi folks, this is John Watson, International Master John Watson, talking to you on ICC from the Sinquefield Cup. I'm not actually physically present, but we're talking about the Sinquefield Cup tournament as we have been for the last 7 days. Very exciting tournament, the best players in the world, including world champion Magnus Carlsen and almost all of the other many of the other top 10 players in the world. So this is round 7 that we just finished, or is just finishing. There's one game still going on that I think is just about over, or may have even finished by the time I'm talking to you now. And going into round 7, we had Maxime Vachier-Lagrave actually in first place by himself, with 4 points ahead of Vishy Anand, Levon Aronian, and Magnus Carlsen, all at 3.5 points. Fabiano Caruana, Sergio Karyakin, and Hikaru Nakamura were tied. Oh, I'm sorry, just Fabiano Caruana and Sergio Karyakin were tied with 3 points, and then below that, Hikaru Nakamura, Peter Svidler, and Ian Neptomniachtchi were tied with 2.5 points, and last place was Wesley So with 2 points. He's not having a great tournament. But these are all monstrously strong players, and someone has to be doing well and someone has to be doing badly. Okay, so going into this round, we have 5 games. It turned out that I think, well, 2 of them were for sure decisive, and it looks like one more of them is going to be, I'm sorry, one of them was for sure decisive, and it looks like one more of them is either already has been or is going to be decisive. I may as well tell you those results first, so I can, before I start showing you games and things. Vishy Anand beat Ian Neptomniachtchi in a kind of surprising game. I'll show it to you. It's not necessarily that exciting, but the end of it is very mysterious. And Maxime Vachier-Lagrave drew Sergei Karyakin in an absolutely amazing game, which was heavily theoretical and then all of a sudden just completely irrational and crazy. Wesley So drew Fabiano Caruana. That was a very dull game. Almost nothing happened, and it was a fairly quick draw. And it looks like when I left that Levon Aronian was going to beat Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru had gotten into a pawn down endgame. It looked winning to me for Aronian. It may even be over by now, so that's probably a win. And Peter Svidler and Magnus Carlsen drew. They played a standard opening. Svidler went into a position that was completely safe for white and also simplified, and managed to draw. Carlsen tried a little bit to win, but it was basically not in a very exciting game. So I'm going to show you the 3 games, try to get to 3 games, which will be Anna Neptomniachtchi, probably most briefly because it wasn't full of that much content, and then I'm going to show you Vachier-Lagrave Karyakin, which has this wonderful finish, and then Nakamura Aronian, which was just a very exciting, interesting game, and pretty theoretical too, interesting on a theoretical level. So just for the record, the standings now are Vachier-Lagrave and Vishy Anand, of all people, tied for first, probably with Levon Aronian. So they should all be at 4.5, assuming Aronian wins. Magnus Carlsen is at 4. In clear 4th place, and 5th through, I guess it would be 6th, are Caruana and Karyakin. Nakamura is probably going to lose, so Svidler would be alone in 7th, and Nakamura, Neptomniachtchi, and Wesley So, would be coming up, holding up the rear with 2.5 points. So that's how it stands now. Let's start with this game between Anand and Neptomniachtchi. A game that they've played before, actually. They've had the same opening before, and they've also had, it was quite a theoretical round in many ways, actually. So let me move over to that for a second. Okay, here we go. So it's a Sicilian defense, and these guys have played this line a million times. Both of them have played the Najdorf their entire lives. And what's going on here? Well, White has control of the d5 square, but he has this backward d6 pawn. Black has this backward d6 pawn, so that you'd think would be an advantage for White. But Black has the central majority that characterizes the Sicilian defense, the d6 pawn and the e5 pawn, and this is also, this move h5 seems funny, but it stops the move g4, which is what this move here that Black was worried about. These are all book moves, by the way, standard moves. Okay, so taking that knight voluntarily, usually we're used to White being forced to take that knight before he takes it. Here he takes it voluntarily because it increases his control over that key d5 square. And then he occupies that square. Now he can support that with other pieces like a rook and a queen along the file, and another knight here. On the other hand, black has, as I say, the central majority, 2 pawns to 1 in the center, and black has the 2 bishops, the bishop pair. The bishop pair looks pretty passive right now. Look, that bishop's not going anywhere, and this one's reasonably well placed, but nothing special. But in the long run, bishop pairs tend to be very effective. So if black can sort of free his game and get a little space, then the bishops might come into life later. All this has been played before. Before actually, the same opponents had b5 on the 12th move instead of g6. Instead of black playing this move g6, he played the move b5. They drew that game, but Anand had undoubtedly improved on that and was ready to play again. This last move, this knight c5, there was a game between some top players where black played rook c8. And that was also Ananda's white, and black actually won that game. So, but Nepomniachtchi didn't repeat that either. He played this one. So Vasyl has actually beaten Anand in this position, and he only had 1/2 a point out of 2 against world-class players. So it's interesting that he even bothers to repeat the line. But in this game, he gets a slight advantage. He manages to keep control of that square, and he's going to put the other knight there because b4 is maybe happening. He wants to be able to put the other knight in on that square. And this knight here is pretty useful because it holds up f5, maybe supports the move g4. So probably white has a small advantage here. Now white's thinking about blasting through with the move g4. Black activates his bishop. Notice that bishop was doing nothing, but now it's doing something it's on a nice diagonal. If nothing else, it can exchange a knight, which it does right now. So these are all pretty normal, standard sort of things to be doing. This game has not been that remarkable yet. And black's very close to being equal. Okay, white can't really find a plan here. The problem is if white plays here, I assume black would play here, blocking the position, and white can't break through. So white can't activate that rook. So white tries this instead, and black gets rid of a piece. Now white has a beautiful outpost, but in return, black's got this file and a very active knight. This bishop is not particularly good at the center pawn. Usually when you want to see how good a bishop is, you look at the center pawn. There's a pawn on e4 that's the same color as the bishop. That's not a good sign. So basically, white's got a little initiative here. He's trying to get some pressure here, and black's king is just slightly weak. He's got a few squares, but there's nothing special going on. Okay, counterattack on the e4 square. That makes a lot of sense. So white wins a pawn. I think this is being criticized, by the way, that black didn't have to give up that pawn. But even having given it up, it doesn't seem to have hurt him any. Because this position, even though superficially white has a little more control, it's basically pretty much even. So, I'm sorry, here, this is the point where someone was saying that maybe black didn't really need to give up this a pawn. There's no reason for it, but it actually turns out to be a pretty good idea. He wants to activate his pieces, so he gives white a pawn in order to get to the 7th rank and attack this twice. So white protects that pawn. It's the only decent move. And here's the key point of the whole game. And I probably wouldn't even show this game except for the fact that things went drastically wrong here. Black played this move. That was fine, sort of holding up. This is a famous thing where this pawn sort of holds up these two from moving. White played here, attacking this. And now black should just go defend it. And the 7th rank rook makes up for the pawn. And this should probably be a drawn game. I think Anand talked about playing here and then here afterwards, and then putting the rook back up here, but he wasn't convinced himself that it was enough to win a game with. Okay, but black didn't make that move. Black made this move, just an amazing oversight here, where, excuse me for 1 second here while I get organized, looking at my notes, see if there's any notes here. Because I guess he just didn't realize that having 2 rooks on the 7th was essentially meaningless. Sure, maybe he'll get that pawn, but it's obvious that these pawns are stronger than these pawns, which aren't as far advanced. So white simply defended that, and black took 1 check first and then took a pawn. But you can just see this is very, very slow. Because what are you going to do about these? This pawn's going to is already supported by the rook. Black's pawns are far from queening. Basically, white's winning the race. I don't know what he miscalculated. He said after the game he should have played just what he said, rook b8. The whole idea of b4 maybe just a miscounting or miscalculation. See, it's way too slow to try and take this pawn and queen your own pawn because white will have queened by then. There is a clever move now, by the way, that was pointed out by the computer, which is to play here. Because if white takes that, then you really are queening quickly. And you might say, well, why make the move? Well, because this way he can maybe get behind this pawn. It doesn't really save black, as you can imagine. White's still too fast. White's got too much going on. Maybe I think just this move, stopping rook b4, and then the rook has to come over and try and stop the pawn anyway. And white gets there first. You can work this out yourself over the board, but he didn't even play that. He played something else, and very soon the pawn was just okay. Now the threat is a4, a5, a6, a7, resigns. So it's really that simple. I think, was that the end of the game? No, there was a couple more. Oh, yeah, the king goes over to stop the pawns just in case. Okay, so that's a nice win by Anand, but really was dependent upon a real big blunder by Neptomnio Chichi right, towards the time control, actually. Well, in move, not that early. I guess it was fairly early, move 31. Okay, but a real triumph for Vishy Anand, who's now tied for first place. He just never seems to get older or never seems to falter. Amazing result for him so far. Okay, so let me now show you the next game between Hikaru Nakamura and Levon Aronian. Quickly figure out which game this is. I think it's this one. There we go. Okay, this is as far as I got. We'll see this in a second. I think this game is probably over by now. You guys can check this. But because it was certainly completely winning by the end there. But the game itself was very, very interesting. It's a highly theoretical game, and it's sort of old-fashioned. It goes back to the old days. This is the old main line of the English opening. The old main line of c4, e5 used to be played countless times. I'm sure there are literally hundreds of thousands of Masters games with this. And this is the line that was played in the most famously, although it's been played a lot before that, in the Karpov-Kasparov match. I think the first match, maybe it was played in more than one match, but it was played in 1990. Let's see if I have this here. 1989, I think. No? Somewhere around there anyway. One of those matches, one of their many matches. Now this pawn is attacked 3 times, so black has to get rid of one of the attackers, but that to some extent cripples white's structure. And the fight is between black's space advantage. He's got that pawn all the way up there. And white's 2 bishops. Remember I told you how strong bishops were. Bishops are always very dangerous. So white plays there. It's probably the most important move. It's the move that Kasparov played. It's played a lot now. To this day, this whole line is played a lot. A lot of times this happens, this variation. But there are other things you can do. You can do things like, for example, well, you can do what he did in the game, which is this amazing move that Karpov came up with, just advancing further into the game. And now if white takes, he's got some really broken up pawns. This has been played anybody. So anyway, Boris Gulko won a few games, but after a while, black figured out how to play against this just by sort of restraining white's pawns, and it turned out to be about equal. So the main line is this, keeping things flexible. Now white's got the idea of putting a knight there and just winning a pawn, but he also has the idea that he's got some really good control of the center going on. The move f4 might be very nice, bringing the bishop, increasing the bishop's influence, and maybe even bringing the knight back this way. So given a couple moves, white's simply winning this game because he has the bishop pair and that pawn on e3 can be weak. But black's got the initiative and he breaks in the center as Karpov did, and white... okay, so that's the first move. I actually have not kept track of the theory of this line, even though I knew it very well at one point. For years, everyone played this move, and they still play this move. Either this move right away, very common move, or sometimes people take first and then play a move like this, for example. And I won't go into the theory of that, but I think black's considered okay, that black can hold those positions reasonably well. This is a famous line that, well, anyway, this is to me sort of a new move to play this queen a4 move, but it turns out it's been played quite a bit at the top levels. Well, maybe not quite a bit, but some on the top levels. And let me really quickly look at my notes on this just to see if there's anything worth saying here. Okay, now d4 has been played in a couple of games, and black did okay, but apparently white was happy with that because the main move has been this move, attacking the knight. He takes there to give his knight a square on in the center of the board, and black takes back, and white moves into the center. And now black has to keep things going because this pawn is there's a threat of playing c4, maybe putting the bishop on the long diagonal or taking that pawn, and maybe f4, and the bishops will just rake black's position. So black has to move quickly. He attacks the knight directly, and there was a game here already. There's been one game here before between Svidler and Karyakin, two players in this tournament, which was drawn. But I'll just show you how this game went. In that game, they played actually bishop b2. Let me see if I can show you that. That was, is that possible? No, actually, I'm not sure how that went. But anyway, okay. There was a deviation there somewhere. Okay, so he plays knight c5. And now the problem is f4 is really going to free what I just told you about. f4 and c4 is really going to free white's bishops, and then white's going to have much the better game. So he stops f4 and traps this bishop, which has no good positive moves now. On the negative side, he gives white's pieces free reign in the center. Okay, so white comes back. Mysterious move. It's actually been played before, believe it or not, and it's hard to describe. The idea is that he wants to protect this against like rook b1 and queen b3 kind of idea so he can get his bishop out quickly. That's probably the best way to phrase it. There's other good points to it, but basically believe it or not, it's the computer's first suggestion. Okay, white moves back, black moves up to defend the center, and white counterattacks in the center, starting to get his pieces out. Black goes back. There, finally a beautiful bishop, unopposed by any dark square bishop for black. And white's, again, close to getting some sort of advantage. If he can get a move like rook over and pawn up and start moving these center pawns, that would be very good. The one good thing black has going for him is this cramping pawn and space and the fact that this bishop has been blocked off. And so Hikaru makes a very good move. He's just going to bring the knight into the center of the board. I'm sorry, Aronian makes a very good move. And now Hikaru takes a big chance as white. He plays this d4 move. That's a pawn sacrifice. And probably objectively, it's not that good. What he's trying to avoid is a line like this. The computer gives this move. And the reason that is a logical move, even though it looks absolutely ridiculous blocking off his own, you're just getting to a non-open file like that, is that now he can play d4, and when that pawn gets taken, this pawn won't be attacked with check by a knight. And so then he can go ahead and play what he wants to do, which is open up the position. The problem with that is black can do a counter sacrifice here, and then play like that, threatening queen h4. And there's a lot of things you could say about this position, but in the end, it seems like it ends up being basically almost a forced draw here. And I could show you that, but I think it might be not worth it because I want to get to another game before the end of the day here. But this turns out to be a sort of a draw. White can simplify, but then black can get a perpetual check. So instead of that, he attacks, but black is able to take this pawn and continue to maintain an advantage. White takes, that's good. He needs to get his pawn back, but then after that move, his queen is in a little bit of trouble. Now, it turns out that black could have played this move right away, and that probably was a better move. It looks obvious, check, but on the other hand, the queen's attacking the rook for nothing, and a rook's coming to the d file really quickly. It turns out this is actually good for black. Black played it more carefully here and allowed white to retreat, and then played a very simple move, maybe queen e7 slightly better. And now what happens here in the rest of this game is kind of interesting. Black really ties, this bishop's having trouble. Black's got a lot of space on the king's side, but on the other hand, white's got otherwise open lines and good pieces. But just because of the difficulties of white getting activated here with this bishop, black is actually better here. White doesn't figure out a way to break all this structure down. Now black's got an open file with some pressure on the A file. And things go wrong, and it's not clear exactly where they went the most wrong. But now this pawn is attacked, and finally what Hikaru does is he decides to give it up in order to solve the problem of this bishop. The problem is that now he loses another pawn. He's attacking this, but now he has trouble defending this pawn. So he wins one pawn back, loses that one, and this knight is just very strongly placed. Okay, and here's a good case where Aronian is calculated really well, because with one more move, white could probably survive this position. For example, bishop takes, king takes. That would probably be okay for white. White could probably get away with that, even if he has a pawn down. But what happens instead is that Aronian had already calculated this very nice move, check. And you'll see how that works. check here. This is all going to be forced. This bishop is now hanging, and there's no way to keep the king protecting. So the bishop has to come back, but then the bishop's attacked again. He goes over and defends, and you might think, hey, white's a piece up, but that move threatens, guess what? Checkmate in one move. Rook over. That means that white has to give up any pretensions of keeping his piece, so he plays back, and the problem with that is now this move. Once again, if white takes, it's checkmate, but there's 3 pieces attacking the bishop. So the bishop retreats, and then black wins his piece back. So now black's going to be 2 pawns up once white takes this pawn. There's no, if you look at it for a second, you'll see there's no way to defend everything without allowing a new queen or something like that. Okay, so now it's even in pieces, but black has an extra pawn and has a lot of threats. And turns out there was a small mistake. He could have finished the game a lot more quickly with that move. That was the best move. But maybe there was a little bit of time trouble, or maybe he just thought this would be easy. That's a good defensive move. Now, I got to the point here, I can check and make sure that this game was won. I'm almost sure that this should be a winning endgame for black, and very soon it looked utterly convincing because you've got split pawns with bishop versus knight. And this pawn, you notice, is the same color as the bishop for queening purposes later, if it comes down to that. It can't be blockaded. It's not the wrong color rook pawn, it's the right colored rook pawn. So I'm going to just buzz through here and see how far we get. Because, yeah, we left it here. It's possible that white even resigned in this position. The point is this pawn will fall, and I don't think there are any miracles in this position is what I'm trying to say. You can goof around a little bit there. You can play for some tricks, but ultimately black should win this position. Okay, so without further ado, let me buzz on to the last game, which was kind of the most amazing one in some ways. It should have been almost the most boring one in some ways, and then it turned out to be outrageously complicated. This is the game between, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Sergei Karyakin. And it starts out as a Berlin defense, which we've all seen a million times, this thing. This is considered very drawish, this endgame that they go into now. And a lot of you have seen this many, many times. Okay, it's even material. The queens are going to go off. And guess what? Another 2 bishops theme. White has 2 knights. Black has a bishop pair. The bishop pair is a huge advantage, but white has space and white has better development. And black has slight weaknesses here. And so this is considered a dead even endgame. And it's been played on the highest levels of chess ever since Kramnik played against Kasparov and drew several games, which helped him win the match, because drawing with black is always a good thing. And this is actually, he used this defense to win the match against Kasparov. And ever since then, it's been used by almost every top player in the world to try to get draws. And it's really frustrated white. And in fact, just real quickly, let me show you what has been going on. What's been going on here is that white almost always plays this move now because he fears this way of drawing for black, or way of trying to draw for black. And the other thing white does, of course, is plays here because he wants to play d3 next. So anyway, here's the Berlin defense. Okay, notice that white wins, black won a pawn, but now white wins his pawn back, and the queens go off. And these are all standard moves now, and that's the scary thing about this game. This opening, there's books on it and articles, and there's countless games by the players in this tournament, by the top players in the world. That's what you'll see. They've all played the Berlin defense at one point or another, usually with both colors. So these people are incredible experts at this opening, and all these moves have happened before. Now you can play other moves. There's plenty of other defenses for both sides, but these exact moves have been played numerous times. So let's just kind of continue here, because you can always look this up. This is just theory. And let me see, was there any game? Yeah, I actually wrote down there were some games between these exact opponents too, and between Vichy Anand, who's in this tournament, that followed all of this and made slight deviations along the way. But this exact position has also come up before. And this exact position's come up where black blocks off the file but gives himself a weak h-pawn, and white goes running after the h-pawn. And after the game, Vichy Anand, who didn't play the game but was watching it, and then after Vichy's game was finished, came up and looked at it, said that yes, he had looked at this exact position all the way up to the move king h5 coming in preparation for his match for the candidates tournament. And this was, I don't know, quite a few years ago, maybe 6 years ago or something, that he'd looked at this exact position. And there were actually several games in the database from this position. Isn't that scary? How awful, right? This is the worst of chess. The best thing about chess is sometimes these miraculous things happen anyway. It's impossible to tell who's winning. Black has this incredible passed pawn, and white has these things that are going to be passed pawns. So black starts pushing his passed pawn. Looks like black should win this race, but in fact, he almost loses. Because the idea is, okay, for example, if he plays a3, the idea is that this, that white gets in really quickly. White plays, well, either king g7 first or e6 first. I think e6 might not matter. I think it's still a draw, actually, but he can try to win by playing this kind of sequence. Now, black probably should just play here. But if black takes, I believe this is now winning for white, because you can't really stop this happening. And the bishop's still there to help in a checkmate. If black queens and then white queens next, it's going to be like a checkmate. So, but black can play this, and I think probably still draw. But I'm not going to go into these things are incredibly complicated and strange. But both sides started using enormous amounts of time here. I think Karyakin used 40 or 50 minutes on this next move, and it was a good move. It was an excellent move. And white played this quickly, fairly quickly. So white had this all memorized. And white's idea now is that this is also another strong pawn, but still e6 is still an idea, and then after f6, g6, king g7, etc., etc., etc. So black played very naturally. White played the right move. He's trying to clear out those pawns, and he's almost winning this game, but not quite. White plays there. It's very exciting. Black has to take, because this is now becoming a mating idea. And white played here, trying to queen, but black queens first. I'm not showing you all the amazing, weird complications that could have happened. Kasparov was going over this with some other strong players and showing all kinds of crazy lines. But actually, at first sight, it almost looks as though black should be winning this, because he's got 2 extra pawns and the queens are going to be even. But white has a very nice move here. Instead of queening the pawn, he plays here first, because that way the knight can't come back into play. And black finds the best move here. There's 2 ways to draw this, but the best one, the easiest one, is to play this move, because it attacks the bishop with tempo, and you can still swing over here to attack the queening square. So it's very exciting stuff. Bishop there, because if he takes it, it's with check. Doesn't want to do that, because he actually is going to get checkmated. For example, if you make a move like this, king here, white can play here. And, well, what can you do? If you get a queen here, what's going to happen is that the queens are going to go off, and black's going to be left with 2 extra pawns in the endgame. So this is simply not going to work. For example, king here and queen here, and then the pawn's all queen. So black actually came close to winning this, but white has this very nice idea of playing just bishop here, saving his bishop, now threatening, for example, not just to queen, but also to play this move g6, maybe queen 2 pawns. So black plays here just in time, and white has to queen now. All this stuff comes off, and black still has extra pawns, but the problem is this pawn is going to queen unless black sacrifices for it immediately, and that's what happens. Black sacrifices for the pawn. Now we have a bishop versus 3 pawns. There's only 1 pawn left, and the bishop can easily handle black's pawns. So this is a draw. Bishop goes, takes one of the pawns, takes another pawn, and I think they agree to a draw here. Yeah, because this is a drawn position. All right, so I hope I didn't take too long on that. I want to thank you very much for listening. There's a bunch of exciting rounds to go. Vishy Anand making his big comeback. Vashir Lagrave is still also tied for first, and so is Lev Aronian, assuming he won that game with Hikaru. So tune in tomorrow on ICC, and we will continue this tournament and have you should have a really great time. I think there was some real fighting chess today. There are a couple of games that were pretty much routine, but a lot of these games got kind of crazy. Probably the most credit goes to Lev Aronian for playing such a nice game against Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru didn't play badly at all, but one really just took a little bit too much of a chance, and Lev Aronian found that nice little combination at the end to secure the win. And so that was probably the game of the day. That's probably the best game. And then this game between Vashir Lagrave and Karyakin shows that even if you have 30 moves of theory, sometimes there's still some amazing complications that pop up. Karyakin almost went down to his last minutes in this game. Even though there was all that theory, to get to the first time control at move 40, he had maybe a minute left or something like that. It was very, very close. So it's good to realize that even when there's a lot of theory and both sides are all booked up, sometimes some pretty interesting and unexpected things can happen. Thanks, everybody, and as I say, tune in again tomorrow.